is being sponsored by Chicago Auto, a woman-owned and environmentally concerned repair shop in Cambridge, and also Rule Broadcast, offering professional broadcast and industrial video equipment rentals. Hi, welcome to Dead Air Live. I'm Laurel Greenberg. Tonight's show is called Electric Vehicles, and it's a lot more than a golf cart. Did you know that 50% of the air pollution in New England is caused by fossil-fueled vehicles? Well, it's concern over that air pollution and imported oil that's forcing this country and this state to realistically consider electric vehicles as part of our future. Tonight's show will be in two parts. The first part, we're going to talk about the politics and policies of electric vehicles, and the second part, we're going to talk about the electric vehicle itself. Let me remind you that as we air this show, the electric vehicle and solar car road rally, the American Tour de Sol, is taking place right now. So we're going to see scenes from that, and we'll talk about that in the second half. Right now, joining me in the studio for the first half of the show are Nancy Goodman from the Union of Concerned Scientists and Sonia Hamill, who is Director of Air Policy in the state of Massachusetts. So this is really a very timely issue, electric vehicles and what's going on. And let's give a little bit of a history leading up to the circumstances right now. So Sonia, let me ask you how this all started with the Clean Air Act. What did that set up for us in terms of automobiles?
Well, in 1990, the Clean Air Act was amended, and it provided a very, very high set of standards for the states over the whole United States to meet clean air requirements. And it recognized that 4 out of the 5 worst of environmental hazards are air pollutants. It established a number of requirements for states, and we're hearing a lot about them as each state tries to comply and tries to meet health-based standards. Some of the most stringent ones, though, were ones related to automobiles. And each state was given 2 choices. One was a standard federal program, and the other was a Cleaner California program. In 1990, the Massachusetts legislature chose the Cleaner California program, and I'm very glad that they did. I think it's a wonderful choice for cleaning up our air.
So let me get into a little more detail about that California program. That actually mandates specific types of vehicles that have to be implemented by certain years. And let's talk about the low emission vehicles and the zero emission vehicles.
Okay. The way that the Act works, it's basically a performance standard, and it says that starting actually this year in Massachusetts that we start getting cleaner cars. If you go to any dealership in Massachusetts right now and buy a car, you'll get one of those cleaner, low emission vehicles. What it requires is that over time, we don't stop there, that we continue to get cleaner and cleaner vehicles moving towards what are called ultra-low emission vehicles, which right now tend to be things like natural gas or very clean gasoline cars, and zero emission vehicles. And right now, the best way to provide that standard is with electric cars. Now, we know that electric cars aren't really zero in the world in general. There are power plant emissions, but even including the power plant emissions, they're extremely clean.
Nancy, I know that the Union of Concerned Scientists works hard in California in particular. Can you tell me sort of what they have been doing in terms of pushing this ahead and what their policy is on this?
Well, they've been supporting the zero emission vehicle mandate in California, which would mean 2% of the cars sold in California or produced in California would have to be zero emission vehicles by the year 1998. So they've been working with the state legislature to maintain that standard and to stave off some attempts to dismantle the standard, the mandate, rather. We're concerned for 3 primary reasons that we support the clean car standards and the zero emission vehicle standards for 3 primary reasons. One, of course, being public health concerns. The second is our dependence on foreign oil imports. Right now, the country as a whole imports 50% of its oil. And I think New England as a region imports about 70%. And clearly that's dollars that are leaving the region and also dollars that are dedicated to making sure that those oil resources are protected and available to us. And in terms of public health effects, clearly pretty much everyone is aware of the effects of breathing smog. There are parts of the population that are particularly vulnerable, children and the elderly, but it really affects everyone. Lung capacity is diminished, and also there's some evidence that resistance to infections is also an impact from breathing dirty air.
It's my understanding that Congress had determined that many cities were as bad as the California cities, and that is why other states were allowed to set up these mandates. And a mandate would you like to explain, so that we're going to talk a lot about mandates during the show, what the mandates, what we're referring to.
Basically what it requires is that at least 2% of the vehicles sold are electric, or zero emission, I should say. But the program is larger than that. I think the car makers have focused a lot on the mandate part, but they really have a problem with the fact the states are asking for cleaner cars, that we're tired of out-of-state manufacturers polluting our air. And that's why the mandate comes in, because we've actually set a standard. They can meet it a number of ways, but we do require that they meet it.
So it means that the automobile makers have to provide a certain amount of low emission or electric vehicles by a certain date, and that is why they don't feel that they should have to be.
They've been fighting the mandate, every step of the way.
Okay.
They've been spending millions of dollars lobbying, public relations campaigns, legislation introduced to dismantle the mandates in California, Massachusetts, and in New York as well.
I think another point is that cars are about 5 times cleaner, 5 times dirtier than all of the industry combined that we have in our state. They're about 3 times dirtier than all the power plants combined. We've been extremely strict about industry and power plants making their contribution to cleaning up the air. We've asked them to do it before. We're asking them to do it again. Yet, if we closed down every industry in Massachusetts, we still wouldn't have half the problem handled. So that's the reason for taking this so very seriously.
And the electric vehicle would, how much of the problem would the electric vehicle solve?
A significant portion of the problem. It would reduce the elements that contribute to smog significantly, even when, as Sonia said, you still take into consideration what's emitted from the power plant, the generation of the electricity from the power plant. Still significant reductions, between 80 to 90% of the elements that combine to form smog. In addition, you also should consider particulates, which, small particles that you breathe, and those are also, quite dangerous. And in fact, there was a recent study by the Harvard School of Public Health that basically indicated that those individuals living in cities, the dirtiest cities, were 15 to 17% more likely to die prematurely from particulates in the air than those living in cleaner cities.
So it seems like it is definitely a part of a solution that we need to be moving towards, and we're going to get into some of the more controversial aspects in a few minutes, and bring everybody up to date and tell people what they can do in terms of supporting electric vehicles on the legislative level. I'm going to introduce a tape now that was shot at a symposium sponsored by the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association last October. And there's some speakers there that talk a lot about this issue. And also one of the speakers is the former CEO of General Motors, who clearly says that he is against the mandates. So let's watch that tape and then we can comment on that. At the Sustainable Transportation and Solar and Electric Vehicle Symposium in Providence, Rhode Island last October, David Freeman, renegade CEO of the New York Power Authority, spoke of the development of electric vehicles as an inevitable step in reducing air pollution and dependency on foreign oil.
Is that this country has gone fast asleep on one of the hugest cloud that's overhanging our economy, and that is the oil import dependency. We have had 2 major recessions and 1 war over imported oil, and yet this country slumbers on. It is this addiction to the dependency on imported oil that is one of the major reasons why we must move to energy alternatives, to domestic sources of energy in order to get to work. I think that we have gotten almost blasé about the serious problem of air quality. But you're not blasé about it when you are told that a surgeon that looks at the lungs of an 18-year-old kid who died in an automobile accident in Los Angeles says that the lungs look like somebody that's 40 or 50 years old because they've deteriorated so badly because of the air quality. I mean, we do have, and we continue to have, unhealthy air in the cities that we breathe. And we do have a scientific analysis that says there is a risk of the whole climate change situation providing disastrous results for this civilization. Now, the electric car is the insurance policy against dying of cancer or running the risk of global warming. Now, you might not want to think of it quite that bluntly or that clearly, but that's really pretty close to it.
Freeman has a vision of a sustainable future for the environment and the economy. His vision includes developing not only electric vehicles, but, equally as important, developing the energy technologies of solar and wind power.
Now, the electric car is not a zero-emission car if we are going to just stick with coal and oil as the source of electricity. If we look to a sustainable transportation system of the future, we've got to pay as much attention to the fuel as we do the car or the vehicle. And I think that we are at a stage in the life of this high-energy civilization where it's time to think of solar power in all of its form as the fundamental alternative to both nuclear power and fossil fuels.
Also speaking at the symposium was former General Motors CEO Robert Stempel. Stempel, a proponent of electric vehicles, nonetheless toes the company line when it comes to fulfilling government mandates.
Now, this audience knows the vehicle manufacturers are opposed to the mandate. And be very clear on that. They are not opposed to electric vehicles. They are opposed to the mandate. And I'm not personally supportive of the mandate either. Now, my lack of support for it is really rooted in science and technology. We really don't know enough today to lock in on a given technology and tool in volume for that production in time for '88. The technology, frankly, that we have today is probably going to be obsolete in '98. It's moving just that fast.
I had the chance to corner Stempel later on the showroom floor and ask him again why he opposed the mandates.
My concern is if we rush the vehicle or don't have a battery, the person we count on the most, the customer who buys it, may not be there. And that, to me, is key. If I can offer you a vehicle that's fun to drive, safe, economical, I might have a customer. But if it doesn't meet some of those criteria, you're going to be a little upset.
Explaining the issue from another point of view was Michelle Robinson from the Union of Concerned Scientists.
That they question whether or not there really is a market for these cars quite yet. And it's interesting because GM has a vehicle called the Impact, which has been very successful. It's a very sporty, neat electric vehicle that can perform just as well as any conventional vehicle on the road today. And they have been previewing it in California. They have several hundred people who are currently driving it in a pilot program for them around the Los Angeles area. They're doing this also in Phoenix and in San Francisco, and it's been extremely successful. They had thousands and thousands of calls, from people saying, "We want to drive. We want to try your car. We would be interested in buying something like this if you made it available." So everything tells us that there really is a market out there.
Again, hearing from David Freeman, he is concerned about the next century also.
Why have the economy in the risk of a sudden run-up of oil prices and a recession? Why run the risk of having to send young men and women over to some part of the world to fight to preserve our oil supply. And believe me, we have, and we'll do it again. You know, my friend Jim Schlesinger said it very well. You know, under Jimmy Carter, we had an energy policy to get off of imported oil. We called it the moral equivalent of war. But as Jim said, the American politicians seem to prefer the real thing. It's somehow easier to send our troops over than to enact a 50-cent a gallon gasoline tax or something like that, or to even vote for it. If we could just, you know, get the automobile industry to have the courage of our convictions, if I can put it that way, and to sell those cars, not only in the United States and all over the world, we can recapture the automobile market for American industry in a dominant mode, perhaps even more dominant than we had in the 50s and the 60s. There is not a urban area in this world that isn't crying out for electric vehicles. I mean, in Mexico City, you can't even use gasoline 3 days a week. They have mandated a market for electric cars in a very, very flagrant manner. They're just saying you can't drive a gasoline car every other day. That's the kind of a mandate that perhaps the automobile industry can warm up to. I would hope so.
That was David Freeman at the symposium in Rhode Island. Very prolific statements about electric vehicles. So getting back to how this relates to us here in Massachusetts, I understand that Massachusetts and New York are two states that are trying very hard to push through mandates so that in coming years we will be able to use electric vehicles. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and the kind of pressure that the governors of those states have been feeling from the automakers?
Yeah, let me make it clear, actually. We have those programs in place. As I said, the cars are rolling out right now. What's happening is that the car makers have come up with a counter proposal, and they've agreed to take certain steps which will make cars cleaner, and they'll do it nationwide, but they won't move past the current gasoline technology. And so really what the question is are we going to hold them accountable to the health of the Commonwealth? Are we going to hold them accountable to continue to make strides in technology or not? Both Governor Weld and Governor Pataki have said that they have laws in their book and they like them, and that they will continue to be open to proposals from the car makers if those proposals include advanced technology like electric vehicles or like zero emission. They're not stubborn and rigid. They're willing to continue to talk about it, but they're not willing to be compromised on environmental standards.
So that's a good note for Weld and Pataki. Now, that plan that you were talking about, the cleaner vehicle plan that the automakers would like to see happen instead of the mandates, has been referred to as the 49-state plan because it, people may have read about this, it covers everything except California, and what they would like to do is have a plan that is separate for everybody else. Any comments from UCS?
Well, again, just to repeat what Sonia said, they're willing to move forward with a 49-state car, but they do not want any state, they are not willing to do that if states maintain the zero-emission vehicle mandate. And for the Union of Concerned Scientists, we really feel to maintain the mandate is of utmost importance. It's what drives and stimulates new technologies, and that's really the standard. I mean, that's where we want to head, to zero emission, not just low emission vehicles, but to zero emission vehicles. So from our perspective, we really commend the governor for standing firm so far and hope that, the mandate will remain in place despite all these efforts to undermine it.
Another woman from your group, Michelle Robinson, mentioned about the GM impact, and do you have any comments about, I mean, she mentioned that it's extremely successful as a sort of a trial program, and yet I guess GM is hesitant about.
Yeah, GM is willing. I mean, I think they have a very good product, and they would be happy to unroll that product, but they don't want to be required to. I think one of the things that we're going to see is that a number of the Japanese car companies, instead of fighting us on the mandate or fighting us on requirements, have just gone to see what they can produce. I think once again we're in danger of having the Japanese clean our clocks in terms of the kind of technology that's brought forward. We've heard that several of the companies are bringing cars to the California Air Resources Board in the next month and a half, some of them with very good range, very good products by very reputable Japanese car companies. Part of that's stimulated by the fact that gasoline prices in Japan, and I also have to say in Europe, are much, much higher than in the U.S. And so they do see large markets in both those places, but our car companies could be going after those markets also. And we're not primarily doing it for their, for our car companies, but I think that there's a pretty good national rationale for it.
Now, what other benefits will arise from developing more electric vehicles?
Like, there are quite a lot. One of the things that Governor Weld, I know, has in mind in thinking about this is the kind of opportunities that there are economic opportunities in Massachusetts. Right now, we don't have a large number of auto manufacturing jobs here, and I think one of the things this offers us is some new kinds of jobs to offer I think they will be very high-paying jobs. Auto manufacturing of electric vehicles is something that's being discussed here in the state and will offer us some of the high technology kind of transfer jobs that are possible.
Okay, let's bring us completely up to date. There's a little crisis brewing in the State House tonight. It revolves around a bill that Senator Jajuga has been working on. Who wants to fill me in on this?
He introduced it today as an amendment to the budget, and basically it's another attempt to dismantle the zero-emission vehicle mandate. And his strategy is to the amendment basically prohibits Massachusetts from enforcing the mandate unless 2 contiguous New England states adopt the same requirement. So that was attached to the budget, and after 2 days of kind of intense lobbying by auto and oil interests, and there won't be any opportunity for public debate or public input. So we're concerned about that, and we suggest that if people are interested in maintaining the mandate, that they contact Senator Bulger, who's the president of the Senate, and also Senator Birmingham, who's the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate.
We'll get those numbers up for you in just a minute. As soon as we can do that in the control room, we'll have put those numbers up. 2 things. One, how likely is it that 2 contiguous states will pass mandates? And 2, how likely is it that this bill would pass?
Well, I mean, Massachusetts already has the mandate in place, so this is an attempt to dismantle it. So it's not a question of 2 contiguous states passing.
No, but the bill would say that we can't have the mandate unless 2 states also.
Right.
I would say, given the amount of lobbying that's gone on in our State House and the strength of the car lobby, that it would be pretty unlikely right now that two other states would adopt the program immediately.
And would New York be considered?
No, they're not New England. So Connecticut has a similar program already. It doesn't have the 2% requirement. It does require some number of electric cars. Whether or not that would count in his proposal is unclear. I think there's a reasonable possibility that it may pass.
So the numbers are up right now, and let's try to put those numbers up again. The urgency is to call tomorrow. Now today's, we are airing this live. It's Tuesday, May 23rd. You should make those calls tomorrow. And then after that, after tomorrow, what else can people do?
Well, people can contact Governor Weld and express their opinion about the clean vehicle standards and the zero-emission vehicle mandate, and commend him again for his support of that. In addition, if people are interested in electric vehicles, they should contact their auto dealers and make inquiries and express their interest, so that auto dealers know that there is a market out there. In addition, people can write letters to the editor also about the issue if they wanted to, you know.
Excellent. Well, I encourage everybody out there to get involved in this issue. And in the next half of the program, we're going to see some electric vehicles and show you how you could possibly become involved in the commuter program here in this state. The next tape we're going to roll is about a man from Winchester who is in the program right now. So let's go visit him.
The electric car is actually more fun to drive. It is a very nice feeling about driving a car that is not dependent on fossil fuels. And again, I think about the possibility that millions of Americans could be driving cars like this, doing an awful lot of their driving and really cutting down on our dependence on foreign oil, not to mention the reduction in pollution. Well, the purpose of the program really is to get cars out of the city. So my obligation in this program is to use this car predominantly to get to mass transportation. If you've noticed as we're driving along, this car is doing everything that the gasoline car is doing. It's keeping up with traffic, it's maintaining a safe speed. So for all intents and purposes, this car, even though it's electric, can do everything that the gasoline car can do. Now, it is true that a gasoline car could go 200 miles on a charge, on one tank of gas, say, whereas this can only go 40 miles. But there are very few times when people need, and certainly we're in that category, there's very few times that we need a car to go more than a few miles at a time. Selectria is the manufacturer that converted the Geo from gasoline to electric, and they sold the vehicles to the state of Massachusetts. The state is now administering the program. Boston Edison is involved, and again, they were looking for people who were interested in using this as a car to get to the subway.
Hello, so that was really exciting. I want an electric vehicle. In fact, I'm going to put this bumper sticker on my car. Maybe I'll get one. So that man, Bob Stone, is part of the Massachusetts electric vehicle demo program, and we're going to talk about that and find out how it's been going and how you can get involved possibly. My guests for this part of the show, David O'Connor is here, and he is a fairly new commissioner of the energy resources for the state of Massachusetts. Next to him is David Diltz, and he is with Boston Edison. Tell me again, you are with the...
Electric Vehicle Product Manager.
There we go, Electric Vehicle Product Manager. And that is the program that Bob Stone is involved with. And last but not least, Carl Tiedemann from Selectria, our very own local electric and solar car company, yes. Let me just begin by getting an introduction about the program. I understand it's the nation's largest program of its kind. David, would you like to elaborate a little on that?
Sure. For 2 years now, the state of Massachusetts has been running a program to demonstrate the feasibility of electric cars. And we have a fleet of 20 electric cars on the road, working every day. People, as we saw on the tape, driving them. And we're collecting data. We've been collecting data now rigorously for more than a year. And we're really pleased with the results. We find that the people who are driving them give them high ratings. They actually pay to use these cars. They're paying a $200 a month leasing fee for the car, so they're choosing this car over what they might get from a regular car leasing company.
And what does that include?
Well, it essentially includes operation and maintenance of the car and an insurance contribution as well. So covers, their
So it's
operations.
actually a pretty good deal.
It is a good deal. Absolutely. Now, the way the program works, they've arranged to drive the car to a T-stop, either Braintree or Alewife, and they plug the car in there, let it charge during the day, come back and take it home at night. We're looking to a new phase in the program in the fall. We're going to add 20 more cars. Great. And those we're going to have more options as far as driving is concerned.
David Diltz, I know used to be with your department, and you were actually one of the people that started the program a couple years ago?
That's correct.
And how was it started? How did it come about?
Well, I guess it all started in 1990 when the Clean Air Act amendments were revised. And the Energy Office realized that they needed to start looking at alternative fuels to help mobile source emissions decrease. So we started the program looking at gaseous and liquid fuels, which was a rather easy program because the conversion costs of an internal combustion engine to run on propane or CNG is relatively low, and it's a fairly quick transition. We wanted to look at all of the fuels, so when we got to the electric area, we realized that we needed a source of funding because you can't just convert a car very easily. It takes quite a bit more than that. So we went through the Federal Highway Administration under something called the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1992. It's a whole mouthful. And then they have a congestion mitigation and air quality improvement section of that. So we're able to access federal funds. 3 utilities joined in the group, and then air quality groups which were requested to join, other state agencies. So a steering committee was formed, the planning process began, and it took about 18 months of intense planning before the first vehicles were procured. And we did that through a competitive bidding process.
And Selectria ended up being the winner of that bid, is that? That's
correct. Selectria was the only vendor who satisfied all the mandatory requirements within the bid specifications.
I'm going to get to Selectria in just 1 minute. So now, just to follow up on that, you are now with Boston Edison.
That's correct.
And so how does Boston Edison tie in with the state in this whole?
Well, Boston Edison was extremely excited when the state decided to go ahead and do an electric vehicle demonstration program. Boston Edison was one of the major monetary contributors to the program, as well as in-kind contributions. Boston Edison was also probably one of the few members of the steering committee that had first-hand experience, because they do have a fleet of electric vehicles that they've had for quite some time now. And they've been doing a lot of developmental work and looking at new components, new battery systems, controllers, motors, and updating the system. So they were able to contribute quite a bit to the initial planning stages of the program. Boston Edison is also working with other state agencies to look at what we call the infrastructure. There's really the electric vehicle and then the infrastructure, which is the means to refuel it or recharge it, if you will. Since most everyone in the northeastern United States has electricity available to them, to make that small transition from a plug on the wall to being able to charge batteries is fairly simple. So 90% of the infrastructure is in place, and we just really need to put the 10% there, which is special equipment or special configurations.
Speaking of the plug in the wall and what we spoke about earlier in terms of the electric vehicle not necessarily being a zero-emission vehicle if you're still using fossil fuels to generate electricity at the power plant, I've read that the program here, when the commuters charge their cars at the T-stations have photovoltaic arrays on the roof.
That's right.
Just tell me a little bit about how
They do
that
all.
saves us.
From the beginning in the program, we wanted to do what we could to structure a program that was sort of zero fossil emissions if we possibly could. The way it's worked out, the way to do that was to install photovoltaic arrays on the roof of the T-stops, and so at both Braintree and Alewife we have large arrays that are collecting solar energy and translating it directly into electricity. Now the fact of the matter is that goes into the wires and enters the system, and so the actual electricity that's generated there cannot be said to go directly into these cars, but the equivalent amount that the cars use is generated, so essentially we're not creating a net increase in fossil emissions,
That's
which
terrific.
we're pleased about. Yeah, we
So
think it's an
you are
important
actually
statement.
generating about what the cars use.
That's right.
About the same amount.
Yep.
That's great. So that brings us to the cars themselves. Now, we're going to see a tape in a few minutes which will feature the co-founder of Solectria, James Worden. But in the meantime, just give me a brief idea of what Solectria is all about.
Sure. Solectria has been producing electric vehicles since 1991. Since that time, we've delivered about 150 vehicles to customers now in roughly half the states in the U.S. and in several foreign countries as well. We convert two types of vehicles presently, as can be seen by several of the photographs around here. We convert a Geo Metro into a vehicle we call the Solectria Force, and we convert the Chevy S10 pickup truck into a vehicle we call the E10. Conversion right now requires us to purchase complete gasoline vehicles from a local dealer and then go to the time and expense of stripping out all of the gasoline parts and then replacing them with electric components that we ourselves have designed and manufactured to fit together. And vehicles that we currently sell range from the lead-acid battery-powered models, which have a range of about 50 miles or so around town, up to some of the nickel-cadmium-powered ones, which go roughly 100 miles. And we're also experimenting all of the time with many of the new battery technologies that are coming along, such as nickel metal hydride, which we've had great results.
So is it a little easier to convert the cars than to build a car from scratch? I mean, what's the purpose of the conversion?
There are many advantages to building a car from scratch, and our founders originally were at MIT and were in the MIT Solar Car Club and raced vehicles all around the world. In fact, in 1989, when James graduated from MIT, he drove a car completely cross-country from California to Washington, D.C., purely on sunlight, just to prove what could be done. He also knew that in order to put an ideal vehicle on the market, in other words, a vehicle specifically designed to be electric, he couldn't start out with basically without the credibility and the reputation in the marketplace. And so building conversions has been a stepping stone process for us to win the public attention and the public notice and so on. And the increases in the technology in the last 6 or 7 years has been nothing short of amazing. The American Tour de Sol electric car race that you mentioned that's going on right now, in its first year, 1989, the range record was 35 miles, and that was set by Solectria, by James Worden. And every year since then, that range has been broken. And last year, one of our vehicles went 214 miles on a single charge. And we feel that accomplishments such as this that are in the public domain help to erase any of the fears or concerns that people may have with the unfamiliar technology.
Yeah, are you going to say
I was just
something?
going to say that I think the range is an important issue, I think, for people using these cars. They want to be able to be sure they can get to where they want to go. I think the important thing about the cars is that we think in the near term they're going to have terrific applications for people who have a predictable driving range and who particularly are going to be driving in urban areas where the pollution problems make it increasingly more difficult to have fossil-fueled cars. So the expansion of the range is terrific because the broader the range, the more people can imagine their driving lifestyle matching what these cars can do.
Right, I could imagine, you have a little fear when you look, the gas tank is low, but when the electric charge is getting low. But I was in that car with Bob Stone, and there's a meter that shows you actually how much charge you have, and so it's very clear. It's not like suddenly you're low and you're gonna, get stranded. Right.
Yeah.
Just for people who have no idea about what an electric car looks like inside, I mean, just give us the basics. It has got nothing like the cars that we're used to.
Well, in many ways, we try to keep the vehicles as close to a conventional vehicle as possible, and that is to ease the transition of drivers so that when they get into a vehicle, it's not like climbing into a spaceship. It's not a foreign experience. As you mentioned, there are some different gauges, particularly the amp-hour meter that shows the energy consumed from the batteries. Other than that, you have a speedometer, air conditioning, AM, FM stereo.
I guess I mean under the hood.
Oh, okay, sure. Most people are surprised when you open up the hood of the vehicle. They're surprised by what they don't see more than anything else. A typical gasoline car, you open it up and it's completely filled with all types of ductwork and tubes and wires and whatnot. And the electric car is very simple in comparison. Basically, there's a battery box, and there's a electric motor that's pretty prominent, and there's a motor controller unit, which is about the size of a VCR, which is the electronics, and that's what tells the car how fast to go and controls some of the other functions of the vehicle.
So, no oil.
That's correct.
No gas, no antifreeze, no transmission fluid.
Probably the greatest savings to be realized from electric vehicles, we anticipate, will come from the lack of maintenance required, the avoided maintenance. Because there's no exhaust system, you'll never have to visit a muffler shop. Because there's no cooling system, you'll never have to visit the radiator shop. It's a far simpler design. As you mentioned, there are no oil changes required. Basically, the only maintenance that is needed is to replace the battery packs, which right now might last a year and a half or 2 years. But the newer batteries coming onto the market, we see now, in many cases will last 3 to 5 years, or in some cases may even last the lifetime of the vehicle.
And I was amazed how quiet they are. Just turn it on, and you go, as you could see in that last tape.
I might be able to just add a little bit to what Carl was mentioning. I recall leasing out these vehicles to all the drivers that are using them now in the mass demonstration program. And Carl was alluding to inside the cabin pretty much looks like a normal car, and in fact it was so easy to allow each lessee to test the vehicle for 5 minutes and then say, this car is so terrific, so easy to drive, where can I sign? And every individual who wanted to meet and test drive the car before leasing it, there was not one of them that said, I can't drive this car, or it's too complicated. Every one of them said it was so exciting to be in this car, and as you pointed out, it's quiet, there's no exhaust, there's no fumes. In fact, when you're in a traffic jam, one of the best things about the car is that you're not consuming any energy, you're just sitting there. So I'm sure we can all relate to the fact of being in a traffic jam in a hot summer's day, smelling all these fumes. Well, if it was a fleet of electric cars, the air would be just as clean as it is with no cars around at all.
And we like to point out that if there's a solar panel on the roof, which we offer as an option, then while you're sitting in traffic, it's a sunny day, you're actually charging your car up as you're sitting there.
That's great. And I will hold my bumper sticker up again and reiterate that I'd rather be driving an electric car. We're going to go to a tape now. As I mentioned earlier, the American Tour de Soul is happening this week, and we're going to see some scenes from that and hope that you can get out to see some of those cars. Let's roll that tape. This is the 7th year for the American Tour de Soul, an annual road rally for electric and solar vehicles. This year's race started yesterday, Monday, May 22nd, in Waterbury, Connecticut, and will finish Friday, May 26th in Portland, Maine. The route changes every year, and this year, as it winds its way through New England, the closest stop to Boston will be in Lexington, Massachusetts, on Wednesday and Thursday, May 25th and 26th. It is named the Tour de Sol, or Tour of the Sun, because many of the vehicles incorporate solar panels, which convert energy from the sun directly into electricity, and therefore become true zero-emission vehicles. The vehicles travel 60 to 70 miles per day and are able to recharge at night. There are prizes awarded for performance, range, efficiency, and least amount of energy used. Five years ago, I attended the American Tour de Sol, which that year was running from Vermont to Boston. James Warden, MIT graduate and solar car visionary, had recently co-founded the Solectria Corporation here in Massachusetts. James was racing in a Solectria racing car that year and won first place in the solar racing division. Over the years, James has led the company in many victories, both at the finish line and on the assembly line. Today, James is still involved in the Tour de Sol, and I caught up with him Sunday, the day before the start, in Waterbury.
I'll be driving the Sunrise this year, and we have 5 different customers entering their production vehicles. These pickups on the right and the Forces on the left. The Tour de Sol has run in and around Boston now for, I think, 6 years. It's been very successful at raising attention, drawing people from around the country and even the world to come and participate here. And us Massachusetts and even New Englanders should be proud to witness cars are made right here in the country. And this time, of course, we'll be coming right by Lexington and have a stop there Wednesday afternoon. So come on down.
The American Tour de Sol is organized by the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association, based in Greenfield, Mass. In 1990, Nancy Hazard, director of the tour, spoke to me of her hopes for the future.
We hope that we can demonstrate that the non-polluting solar electric vehicle is a viable option, that people will really get excited about using this vehicle and will understand why it's so important that we use, that we change the way the kind of vehicles that we use today.
Now, 5 years later, I asked her what changes she has observed.
We've seen a big change in the kinds of questions that people ask when they come to the American Tour de Sol. When we started the event 7 years ago, they came because it was a novelty and they were curious about electric vehicles. They wanted to know how they worked. But now when they come, they're asking questions about how much do they cost, where can I get one, when are they going to be on the market. And people really believe that these vehicles are coming. It's really just a question of when. Not only the number of vehicles, but also the quality and the types of vehicles that we're seeing in this year's American Tour de Sol are dramatically changed. And it's exciting to see both an electric bus and an electric bicycle, as well as sedans, pickup trucks, panel vans. And I think that when we see that wide range of application of the electric vehicle technology, we really understand that how appropriate this technology is and that it can meet our daily needs.
Once again, let me remind you the American Tour de Sol is happening this week, right now, and you can see all the vehicles in Lexington at the Minuteman Science Technology High School. The vehicles will be on display Wednesday, May 24th from 11:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. and Thursday, May 25th from 8 to 10 a.m. before continuing the race. For more information, contact the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association in Greenfield, Mass. Welcome back. So I hope you can all get out there to Lexington tomorrow or Thursday morning and see the cars, or you can go up to Portland, Maine. They'll be finishing on Saturday and there'll be a display all day Sunday. And David Diltz is going to be speaking in Lexington tomorrow night at the race.
I'm also going to be driving in one of the cars.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
Which car are you going to be driving?
In the Sunrise vehicle made by Solectria.
The yellow, the smart, snappy yellow one.
Right. Well, Boston Edison invested a fair amount in the development of that vehicle, so we want to see how she's working.
Great. We're going to get the number to call if you're interested in the commuter electric vehicle program. I want to make sure people understand that it is a leasing program. You do have to lease the vehicles, and it's $200 a month, and that includes certain things. Should we talk about how much the vehicles cost if somebody wanted to buy one? Carl?
I can touch on that. Right now, they are still quite a bit more expensive than the gasoline-powered version, specifically because we're making them in relatively small batches, and there's a lot of labor involved. Our base price right now for the Geo-Metro conversion, the Force, is about $30,000, and the pickup truck that we sell is about $40,000. Our projections indicate that with mass production, there's no reason that these vehicles need to be any more expensive than gasoline vehicles. And the heads of several large companies, particularly European companies, have expressed the same view. As you mentioned earlier, the vehicles are relatively simple when you look at them, and so it's easy to understand why in greater production the cost can fall.
Well, hopefully we'll be looking forward to the cost falling. And in the meantime, if you do want to contact Selectria directly, we can put that number up as well, and they're right in Wilmington. We were talking a little bit during the tape about the people in the program and how they are satisfied with it, and there's a graph here I will hold up very steady to my camera. This is a graph of the customer satisfaction for over a year, and it's on a scale of 0 to 10. As you can see, it's right up there. The 10 is right about up here, and it's pretty much 7s, 8s, and 9s in terms of the rating.
That's right, and an average of 8, and we're really pleased with that. I mean, we think for a new technology that's terrifically promising. If people who are used to the comfort and convenience that fossil-driven cars provide rate these that high, we think that's very promising for the future.
David Diltz, in terms of Boston Edison, what other benefits is Boston Edison seeing about being involved in this program?
Well, Boston Edison, like many of the utilities around the country, recognize that we're under the Energy Policy Act requirements. The federal government passed a requirement for state governments and fuel providers to start introducing alternative fuel vehicles into their fleets. So we know that we must look at electric vehicle technology. Being electric utility, we certainly want to use electric vehicles as these vehicles that we introduce into our fleet. We also see the imported oil issue as major impact and the uncertainty of its availability. So we can get away from that oil if we look at electric as a power source for vehicles. Economic development in the Boston area, as was mentioned earlier, we see this as an enormous potential for creating new jobs and new industry in the Massachusetts and the region.
So obviously this is a good thing for Boston Edison. They're an electric utility company. Have you heard much from the people in the oil industry about this? I would imagine they're not really huge backers. I mean, we could have a whole show on that, but briefly is...
I think in general there's probably resistance to change, and I'm sure the oil interests feel threatened by a technology that may result in less of their product being sold. On the other hand, every year the number of vehicles on the road continues to go up, and so it is an expanding market, and even with the introduction of electric vehicles, I would presume that the oil market will continue to expand. To follow up on something that David said, electric vehicles are fuel-neutral vehicles specifically because the energy to power them can come from so many sources. It is our hope and expectation, in fact the name Selectria was chosen as a contraction of solar electric, with the hope that the energy for our vehicles in the future will come from more environmentally benign sources such as wind or solar power, which are playing an ever-increasing role right now in our energy mix.
We have just a few minutes left. Are there any key points that you want to partake to the people of Somerville?
Well, one thing I would say, and I think everyone would agree, is that this kind of car is the sort of car that people in Somerville might really like. You know, presumably they're working in many cases locally, either in the city or not far from Somerville, and I think this is the kind of car that would be really well suited for driving in and around Somerville. It's probably far better for that than it would be for a rural environment. So that would be one important thing. And the other is, I think it was mentioned earlier, that the battery technologies are really evolving very rapidly, so that while there is a lot of criticism at times over certain performance characteristics of, say, lead-acid batteries, the nickel metal hydride battery, just to take one example of a number that is emerging, look to us like they have enormous potential, and these are now being tested and demonstrated, so that I think we're in a period of rapid and positive evolution of the technology, and that's quite encouraging.
If the mandates were to take place by 1998, as they originally were designed, or I should say if 2% of the vehicles in the state were electric vehicles by 1998, that would be, I read, about 14,000 vehicles. How would that work? Would the state have to provide them in terms of government-owned cars, or would they have to somehow give incentives to people to drive them?
No, I believe the way it would work is that auto dealers would be obligated to demonstrate to the state that of the cars sold in a given year, 2% were of this type. So it would be up to them to put them on the floor, advertise them, market them,
Sell
and
them somewhat affordably.
yeah, exactly, and price them so that they'll move. So it would be their challenge.
Would the state provide any sort of incentives to those, so that, or subsidies or anything?
Right now, there are a lot of bills that are under consideration. Many of them involve tax incentives and so forth. At the moment, I don't think we're anticipating any of those moving in the short run. But I think as the mandate gets closer, we may see some of those move.
Okay. Well, let's hope that happens. Any comments? Final comments? We're going to see you out at the Tour de Sol. You're going to be driving the vehicle. Good luck.
Right. I guess I'd just like to say on a global scale, there are about 600 million vehicles in the world. And statistically, by the year 2010, that number will double. So even if gasoline and other fuels that run much cleaner are introduced, we're not going to be any better off than we are today until we get rid of that tailpipe on the back of that vehicle.
Okay. Well, we pretty much have to say goodnight now, and I want to thank you very much for coming out and sitting under the hot lights tonight. And let's hope that this issue moves forward. And thank you, Somerville, for watching, and for all of us here at Dead Air Live. Good night. Tonight's show has been sponsored by Chicago Auto, 130 Brookline in Cambridge. Boston's only woman-owned garage, Chicago Auto is an environmentally concerned repair shop that offers loaner cars and loaner bikes. Also, very special thanks to Rural Broadcast in Brighton. Rural Broadcast, offering professional broadcast and industrial video equipment rentals.